Hello, my name is Jack Armstrong, and I'm going to be presenting to you today the Graphite Polystyrene Insulated Vinyl Siding and the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act Nano course. This material is copyrighted material by BASF Corporation for 2023, and I wanted to let you know that the program is also accredited through American Institute of Architects for a 1/2 credit unit uh, amount with health, safety, welfare accreditation. The course description, we're going to be touching on how graphite polystyrene insulated vinyl siding acts as continuous insulation and how some of the tax credits and discounts and deductions relate to the HUD filing requirements as well as the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. As a prerequisite, this course is actually an adjunct to the main 1-hour course, Not Your Grandmother's Vinyl Siding, the Advantages of Graphite Polystyrene Vinyl Insulation. So it is considered a kind of nano course and a little bit more of a deep dive to some of the information that was presented in the 1-hour course. In the previous program, when we discussed earlier the Not Your Grandmother's Vinyl Siding course, we learned about many of the advantages of graphite polystyrene insulation, GPS, as it is related to vinyl siding insulated as a high-performance building system. And we'll refer back to several of these today when we kind of zoom in on how project designers and managers and owners can take advantage of several of the tax incentives that came about as a result of the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. So these benefits that are circled here include things like the graphite polystyrene insulated vinyl siding as an exterior continuous insulation. Also, the GPS insulated vinyl siding's role in decreasing energy and also carbon emissions. The GPS insulated vinyl siding's role in helping to meet the new energy codes, as well as the topic for today's course, specifically around tax incentives and funding related to GPS vinyl insulated siding. So by the time we get through this in 30 minutes, you're going to be able to explain what is continuous insulation and how graphite polystyrene vinyl insulation provides that particular element of CI. You'll be able to understand how the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, or as they refer to it, IRA, has incentives and supports energy efficient building design and decision making. And lastly, you'll know why graphite polystyrene insulation in the vinyl siding is a valuable method to earn some of these IRA tax incentives and meet some of the pending housing urban development financing requirements, as well as the International Energy Conservation of 2021 prescriptive requirements. So hopping right into objective number 1, where we can dip into making sure you understand what CI is, continuous insulation, how the GPS insulated vinyl siding acts as that, and then a little bit more just about GPS in itself. So kind of talking about why is thermal bridging such a big deal and why are we talking about continuous insulation at all? Well, the main reason is, if you remember, when we build our walls, oftentimes we're using like frame construction and we're using stud cavity construction. And typically every 16 inches, there's a stud, or every 24 inches in advanced framing. And if you were to add up all of the wood support members in a typical cavity wall system, you'd have about 25% of the walls being solid wood. So every place there is a wood stud is a place there's no room for insulation cavity. So that means only 75% of the walls can really be insulated in the cavity. Additionally, the insulation itself usually has an R value of about 4, whereas wood has an insulation R value of about 1 per inch. So that's why when you look at this picture to the right, you can actually see the studs in the wall, and that's because the heat is leaking out through this building as it's being heated to the cold outdoors. because every time there's a stud in the wall, that's a place where there is about 75% less insulating R value. And this is the reason why the new codes, pretty much since 2009, have required continuous insulation as a way to overcome this. So what does that really mean, and what does it really look like when you're using a product like graphite polystyrene vinyl-backed insulation as a cladding system? Well, when you look at the diagram here, so continuous insulation means it's going to run continuously all around the external surface of the building. So it's kind of like blanketing the building to overcome these little individual short circuits and leaks every 16 inches. So when you look at the diagram here, you can see the studs. You can see that there's some insulation in the cavity between the studs, but the GPS vinyl backed insulation, PVC insulation, and sheathing product actually has this continuous insulation all over those studs that are leaking the energy, in addition to the cladding system. So the large amount of energy that's trying to escape through the wall has a big resistance R value, and only a little bit of it is able to get out because of the help of the continuous insulation to stop that thermal bridging. So when we look at GPS insulated vinyl siding and it providing this extra R value for both new and old existing buildings are really important because there's over 100 million existing buildings that have very little insulation. And so as the picture illustrates here before, to the left, the red is where the heat is leaking through, kind of at the very top there. You can see where perhaps the fiberglass bat or the cellulose insulation has settled in the wall cavity, and so even more energy leaks out there. And then you have, of course, where the individual studs are, thermal bypassing and leaking energy there. So the opportunity to add an insulated product with insulation behind the vinyl siding really satisfies this objective of continuous insulation and energy savings and thermal comfort. So as we look to the 2021 International Energy Conservation Codes requiring continuous insulation to reduce the carbon emissions, you'll remember from our larger course, we talked about the various climate zones. We talked about the requirements of different insulation in both the attics, as well as the floors, as well as the walls. And we've kind of, in a large view here, illustrated by different climate zones on the rows, where prescriptively you can meet the code, IECC 2021, and earlier codes by having continuous insulation. And you can see this is an option in climate zones 1 and 2 because you could have an R13 code minimum wall required, or you can put 0 insulation in the cavity and have it all externally on the outside of the wall, as in the form of continuous insulation. But by the time you get to climate zones 3 and higher, you can see you have to have enough insulation to where you really are kind of required to have continuous insulation on the outside as well. So you can choose to have it a little bit on the outside or all of it on the outside. So as an example, R0 in the cavity and all R13 of continuous insulation on the outside of the wall if you're in climate zone 3. Or you could just have R13 in the cavity plus R5 of continuous insulation, or you can just build a thicker wall and get an R20 value to meet prescriptive requirements. So hopefully that makes a little sense, just kind of as a review. And also just reminding everybody that siding products in general have very little R value, very little R value in the external cladding. So if we have a stone cladding system, essentially 0 0.01. Stucco systems have also nominal value, 0.10 R value. Brick itself also the same, 0.11. Fiber cement, just a little bit too. Vinyl siding by itself, just pure vinyl siding without any insulation behind it, only is providing, while it's more than the other stone and stucco and brick elements, it's still just 0.6, whereas wood cladding might be at 0.81. However, as soon as you add that great GPS-backed insulation, you're able to go ahead and increase the R value anywhere from 2.0 to R value of 3.5. So huge improvements with vinyl insulated cladding. You will remember that we talked about the fact that graphite polystyrene insulation has nominal water absorption compared to many of the other foams. It's 100% recyclable. It meets all the same ASTM standards as white expanded polystyrene, and it has a much lower embodied carbon emissions value. All of that while being able to provide as much as an R25 insulation value. So great reasons why an insulated product like this exists. It can be specified with many of the details, so you can have certainly the options that achieve the continuous insulation, which is obvious around the doors and the windows. You can also specify the permanently adhered insulation options. And then thirdly, you can specify profiles with chases that direct water down and away from the building, so you get good bulk water management. Objective 2, as we transition now, is to understand a little bit how the Inflation Reduction Act, or what we often hear as the IRA, and how it impacts construction with tax incentives and different funding opportunities. So the federal incentives to reduce carbon that were part of the Inflation Reduction Act are really essential ways for the federal government and energy and carbon reduction strategies to be implemented. And specifically, the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, which we've discussed in a separate nano course, illustrates some of that. However, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that was passed in 2021 earmarked an amazing $550 billion for infrastructure, reducing carbon emissions in a variety of different areas, but also improving renewable energy infrastructure, things like charging stations and so on. However, they also have money towards implementing and adopting new, more efficient state energy codes. And that is really where some of the new funding comes in to have tax credits and tax deductions, of which graphite, polystyrene, insulated vinyl cladding systems can help you qualify for those. So zipping in a little bit to what is in the 2022 IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. So what really kind of affects the building construction industry is this bullet here saying $369 billion for funding energy security and climate change. So numerous programs associated with that around things like loan programs and tax incentives for a variety of different incentives around more beneficial public building projects and energy efficiency initiatives. However, most importantly is a suite of tax credits. And these credits have been around for a while, but sometimes they would get adopted and then they would expire, and then they would have to wait for congressional leaders to actually re-implement them. And so they were kind of on again, off again. So the 45L home builder tax credit is one of the most powerful ones. So the 45L is a great way to reduce the cost per unit a tax credit just by building a more energy efficient residential structure. And graphite, polystyrene, and insulated vinyl siding helps meet these continuous insulation requirements from the 2009 code up to the 12 code, 15 code, 2018, even on into 2021, and it will soon be also qualifying for 2024. But essentially what it allows you to do is if a home builder builds to Energy Star values, you can get $2,500 credit per home. Then if the builder chooses to build towards a zero energy ready home, the builder can get $5,000 credit per home. So that is an amazing amount of money that you can get just by qualifying and building to these particular systems, of which great thermal insulation and continuous insulation are certainly required. Then multifamily units can also meet these if you meet some prevailing wage requirements as well. So great news there for how some of the new tax incentives can help everybody get some extra money in the pocket. Changing gears here about the 25C home efficiency improvement tax credit. So this particular tax credit is for the homeowner. And essentially what it allows to do is every year over the next 10 years, you can do some form of energy efficiency improvement in the home. And each year you can claim a 30% tax credit for whatever you're doing up to $1,200 annually. So this can be things like changing windows, putting in extra insulation in the roof, adding continuous insulation around the thermal envelope of the home, upgrading appliances, and things of that nature. All of that, even things like changing doors and windows, all helps improve the energy efficiency of the home and qualify for this particular credit. Additionally, one of the also suites of tax incentives, and in this case a deduction, is the 179D deduction. And this tends to be more of a commercial credit deduction, and you can get as much as $5.36 per square foot as a deduction based on achieving certain energy efficiency levels. Additionally, so whether it's going to be for churches and schools and healthcare, government buildings, all of these nonprofits that aren't paying taxes, these tax benefits can then accrue to other people in the process. So they're not necessarily wasted if you're doing it, these improvements for a nonprofit. So typically they start at about 50 cents per square foot, and they go all the way up to, as I mentioned here, $5.36 a square foot. Sometimes you have to meet prevailing wages, which means you have to pay essentially what would be a union salary if you're not even using union labor to qualify for some of these. Moving on, the GPS insulated vinyl siding, continuous insulation, and the added R value help also meet some new pending HUD requirements for funding. So the Housing and Urban Development actually has, for many of their VA loan programs and their FHA loan programs, the code that you had to build to qualify for some of those was the 2006 International Energy Conservation Code. However, now they are resetting that benchmark of what the minimum threshold is to qualify for those programs. And they're going to reset it to the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. So that's going to be a huge kind of jump step, if you will. Additionally, they are requiring developers to construct HUD-funded homes for low-density housing towards this ASHRAE 90.1 for commercial multifamily projects. And there's also, as I mentioned earlier, for the VA home loans as well as FHA, these homes, regardless of where they're built and what the local codes are across the country, if you want to be able to get these loan programs from the federal government, you have to build to this new higher level. There's additional discussion that perhaps Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, in order to have qualified mortgages where banks would be able to sell their mortgages to the federal government, that they might also have to start building to these higher levels too. But that one's still out there. It hasn't been decided yet. Next, there are these housing and urban development block grants and programs that have also pending energy efficiency requirements. The home Investments Partnership Program, the HOME Act, is really the largest federal block grant to states and local governments designed to create these affordable housing for low-income households. Home funds are awarded annually based on some formulas that go to the different jurisdictions, but there's $3.3 billion to over 1,200 states and local communities for things like community development block grants, as well as other grants that are going on for these stronger, more resilient communities. And as you can see here, the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, GRRP, also provides additional HUD-assisted multifamily housing projects funds if they're going to work to reduce carbon emissions, which means energy efficiency and things like continuous insulation on the outside of the walls. Next, kind of moving on, a little quiz to see if any of this is sinking in. So how does GPS insulated vinyl siding help achieve IECC, International Energy Conservation Code 2021 code requirements, as well as tax credits and deductions and HUD financing requirements? And the answer is, well, GPS insulated vinyl siding provides added R value and continuous insulation for both new and existing buildings. So you're able to help meet what those new higher standards are, and then at the same time qualify for some of the deductions as well as potentially the tax credits. So in the previous program, which is kind of the umbrella program, the 1 hour program, which is somewhat of a prerequisite for this class, not your grandmother's vinyl siding, we learned about the many advantages of graphite polystyrene insulation, this GPS insulation that was going on the back of insulated vinyl siding as a high performance building system. So we've referred back to several of these today, and in the circles that I'm illustrating here, you can see now how designers and managers and owners can take advantage of several of these tax incentives and funding opportunities associated with the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. And so I've circled the various ones here about continuous insulation, meeting the code, whichever code cycle you're on, qualifying for some of the tax incentives and the funding advantages, and lastly, and most importantly, arguably, lowering the environmental burden of our buildings and helping everybody save money. So as a last kind of summary of the course here, there is the main 1 hour course, which hopefully you've already taken. And then there's 3 little nano courses, one specifically talking about environmental product declarations and graphite polystyrene insulated siding. Then there's the GPS vinyl insulated siding about energy code compliance, which you can also learn about. And then, of course, the course that you've just taken, this Inflation Reduction Act information. So a couple of resources that are out there and available for you. If you'd like more information on it, please feel free to visit continuousinsulation.org, or also the Foam Sheathing Coalition, progressivefoam.com, neopor.us /commercial, and then, of course, the master format division number for sustainable mines. So as we end now, thank you for your time. If you'd like further information, please feel free to follow up with Ron Height from BASF, and you can see his email here as well as the website. So thank you for your time, and I hope you've learned how to get some money in your pocket by building sustainably. Thank you.